Hey, Pussy, the little video. So on this one, we're going to do the part 3 of a long time ago when we did a few on dressings. And in this one, we're going to talk more about improvisation of dressings. Ideas and opinions based on the experience that I have, or things I read, or things that they used to do in the past. But the problem with this is it's very hard to study good work. And so that's why most of what we're going to talk about is going to be about principles. So you can, because you can carry them all the time. You don't need a kit for that. You just need to have your head, and they'll be in your head. You won't be able to apply the same dressing that you have. Again, we talked about that a little bit more when we had is the deeper wounds. If you have a narrow, so let's say you have a crampons or something that went inside. What it's going to do is that it's going to go very, very deep in your skin and in your body, and it's going to be hard to do a proper dressing because a lot of time, because the edge are so close to, they'll have a tendency to want to close, but then you'll be left with this big space in between. Versus if you have a wound that is more like this, the edge have less chance of closing. So basically it'll be easier to do what we were talking about, bottom up, to close the wounds. And so that's why the puncture wounds are a little bit different. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. In the regular wounds, we'll go the same concept that we had before. Not too wet, not too dry, right in the middle. Before we were using dressings that were kind of intelligent dressing, as they were doing their job for you. So you would put that on, leave them for 7 days, and that was it. The problem now is the dressing that we have, or that we're going to improvise, they cannot do that because they don't have the capacity of doing this. They'll get closer to, so when we improvise dressing, we'll get closer to the dressings like, well, the same concept that you would use if you would use gauze. Because gauze, basically, it's just a big piece of cotton. It's a medical mesh cotton, but it's a big piece of cotton. So it'll be the same kind of concept. So first of all, let's go with, so in your regular wounds, you'll separate in two. The ones that are wet, the ones that are dry. And kind of from those two, we'll get a third category, but let's go with that first. So wet. So that means that for whatever reason, they're releasing a lot of juice from it. So they have a lot of exudate. And we talked about that before, and I won't go back into that, but they have a lot of exudates. And you need to dry that stuff up, because any space in our body will try to be filled with stuff. So either liquids, infectious, blood, whatever, but it doesn't like holes, so it will try to fill it out with stuff. So the wet things, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have the exudate. So you'll need to change your dressing on a regular basis. So we're talking, and how regular? Again, depending on the exudate. If you have minimal wounds, maybe once or twice a day, you'll be good. But if you have a very large wounds that have major exudate, then we're talking maybe every 4 hours or 4 or 5 times a day. The problem now is that every time that, again, because now our dressings are not as intelligent as they were that we were talking before, every time we're going to be putting a dressing on, the body will see it as a foreign body. And just like if you ever had like a cut or something in your scab, and if you have put any piece of something, because when your body tried to create that scab, will send stuff that are very sticky, and it's going to trap inside any material that you're going to do. And it happens also at a microscopic, even if you don't see. So that's why when you try to take off, especially gauze, when you try to take them off, it's embedded in the body. And we're not talking about 2 or 3 days. We're talking like almost spontaneously. So what happens is that when you pull that out, that nice little layer of product that was there for healing, now you're pulling out with this. So that's why those wounds will take longer to heal as well. As more you're doing the dressings change, more you'll be able to. So one thing, if you're able, so let's say you ran out of dressing for whatever reason, but you're still able to use Mepitel. If you improvise any of the dressing that we'll be talking today about, if you can put a layer of Mepitel, that would be even better than anything else that we're talking about before, because of this, because it will protect that layer under. So the wet, what you want to do is dry them. So basically what you're going to do is put anything that is absorbent. No synthetic though. So if I have a t-shirt, 100% cotton, will be great for the wounds. Even like a bunch of cotton lint from your dryer, and again, making sure that just like when we make fire starters, and I know a lot of people for bushcraft keeps their their cotton lint to start as a fire starter. So if you have a bunch of it, that means that could be dressing as well. If you look at the dressing they used to do in the beginning of the century, so 1900, 1950s, all it was a piece of layers of stuff, stopped with cotton, which is like cotton balls, that they were stuck into it and stuff. The reason they didn't put the cotton balls themselves is that it's all kind of, and this is why it's such a good starter, it's kind of fibrous. And now if you put down the wounds, it stays on the wound. So they were putting kind of layers in between it. And this is what they were putting. So then if you can reproduce that, then you're in good shape. Because if you can put like cotton lint or anything that has cotton in it, so natural, and even on the in the outdoors, if you can grab stuff that has a good absorption on it, so moss could be a good one, and because actually in the first World War, that's what they used to use. They used to use a certain kind of moss that would be absorbing as a bandage. So anything that can have absorption to it, then that means that you can take off the flukes. Basically what you're trying to do, again, not too wet, not too dry, just in the middle. So what you're trying to do is remove that liquid so that the wound can heal itself over there. If you leave too much, you're going to have increased moisture and also maceration. Maceration brings proliferation of bacteria. So basically now from a colonized wound, you get an infected wound. So that's what we're trying to remove. On a note on if you're going to use product from the natural parts of the trees and things like that. I know there's a lot of literature out there on First Nation using bark trees and things like that. The only things I have, and again, I don't have any research on it and stuff because they're very hard to find. It's just when I think about it, the one thing I can have a difficulty with it, it's not so much, so when we're using our body, it's a little bit like and there's more research they're starting to show that, is that we have our own, almost like our own, just like we have our own fingerprint, it looks like we have our own bacteria on us, meaning that we have a certain type of bacteria, more or less or something, for each type. All of us have a certain type of it. Any imbalance in that creates infections, rash, and all those. So if you look at the First Nation, they were living in their environment. So because they were living in those environments, a lot of their bacteria was used to that environment. Change that environment, maybe the bacteria change. I cannot say that and stuff, but that's why when I study naturopathic medication, you have to keep that in mind, that the things of the past, plant has evaluated, their environment has changed, we have changed. So maybe what was good in the past may not work as good today because there's so many differences than when they used to use it. So anyway, so we're talking about wet. So try to keep it as dry as you can. Change it on a regular basis. Another thing is that and when we say wet, we're not talking about bleeding. If you need to stop the bleeding, we talked about that before. Direct pressure, if you can't, a dressing, a pressure dressing on it. If that doesn't stop, then you get to the tourniquet, and we talked about that before. But bleeding has to be stopped before you can start doing what we call wound management. Bleeding has to be stopped before we can start talking about wound management. This is after your clot has been done, your dressing has been closed and stuff. On the other side too is wet. And if you're afraid of getting your dressing stuck, so it seems like it's always stuck, you're pulling, it's very painful and stuff. One thing you can use, and I read in the past, so sometimes some dressing requires telfa, or in our case we always use the, I mentioned that I prefer to use Mepitel than telfa. Well, if you have to improvise the telfa, plastic bags, or even a bag from those. So what those do is basically they create a friction that will prevent stuff. The problem though is using plastic, as you all know, is that it's going to create a lot of maceration. So if you're wearing like a plastic bag on you, then you're creating a lot of humidity keeping. But a piece of it can help with some dressing. So if you have to create the dressing that a telfa would be useful and stuff, those two could be used, and I read in the past that they can be used as well. So a clean bag or a Ziploc, and the ones with the holes would probably would have less humidity to it, because that's the point of them. They left the humidity out for like vegetables and stuff, so they can breathe and not mold inside. So that probably would be a good use. Also, the other dressings that you can improvise, if you have t-shirt, towels, if possible, try as much as possible to have them white. The reason is more that when you wash them, because again, you'll be able to reuse it for the same person. Again, you'll be able to reuse them for the same person. Or for very small, if you're going to reuse it in a small group, make sure that nobody, because we're talking again, flora to another person, and as well as transmissions of disease that can go from one person to the other. But if you have certain things like white, then when you clean them, you'll be able to see better if the blood is in there and stuff. For sterilization, we'll be doing another video on that, but there's ways with the sun, heat, boiling to sterilize those dressings, or actually to make, some boiling, you're talking more about making them clean, but we talk about that before, clean dressing versus sterilized dressing. At this point, I would go for boil. If you have that point of this bird, I would go more for a boiled dressing than for full sterilized dressing. So we're not talking about OR stuff or surgical dressing. So things, and then in the book that I want to mention down, they would talk about how to improvise those, and actually even how to make them, foil them. You can even use your oven if electricity is still available, how to make them as clean as possible from dressing. So if you even go to the dollar store, you can buy a whole bunch of bed sheets, or bed sheets or towels that you can reuse for improvised dressings. And the reason for those dressings versus the other dressing, and this is the advantage, and then it is also the advantage over simple gauze, is that if I have a towel and it's pretty much 100% cotton, just like a little bit like the gauze are, and they're very absorbent, or obviously, that's why we dry ourselves with the towel, is that now I can boil it, reuse it on the same patient. So basically, if I'm talking about 2 or 3 dressing change per day, if I have 3, let's say I can have 3 towels, that means 1 is in the wound, or even 2 towels, 1 is in the wound, 1 gets clean. As it gets dries out, I take this one out, put the other one in the wound, wash this one, then I can change. So that means with 2 dressings, with 2 towels, improvised dressing, I can rechange them constantly on the same person. And all is the purpose of it, again, it's to dry the wounds down so that the healing can happen. It will be longer than the dressing that we were putting before, but you can reuse them over and over and over and over and over.